So much of liberalism in its classical sense is taken for granted in the West today, and even disrespected. We take freedom for granted, and because of this, we don't understand how incredibly vulnerable it is. Niall Ferguson. Please remember, I am not a financial advisor.
Now, the SEC filed a lawsuit in December against Ripple Labs, creator of the XRP token, and the claim is that XRP is an unregistered security. Why did this happen now?
Well, I can't speak to any litigation that's ongoing, but I can say that we have been bringing enforcement actions now in this space since 2017. I anticipate that as long as there's activity in this space, there will be enforcement in this space. But that said, I've been very clear about the fact that I think we need to provide regulatory clarity before we spend too much more time on enforcement where there's not fraud involved.
The SEC is regulating by enforcement actions. Hester believes that there needs to be clarity in non-enforcement actions where there hasn't been fraud involved. She was asked about Ripple and brought up the point about fraud. The Ripple case does not involve fraud. It's about applying 1920s law to new technology. Central bank digital currencies are needed to protect the financial system from shock. Before CBDCs can be implemented, regulators need to write laws for CBDC. When they do, crypto will be umbrellaed with those laws.
The other reason why the Federal Reserve is doing what it's doing is because it's trying to prevent an event from occurring that I have outlined for the longest time, and that is a credit freeze. If the Federal Reserve were to start tapering, were to start cutting back on issuing debt and buying it, this entire system would lock up in a nanosecond. We would have a credit freeze, money would stop flowing, and that's it. Complete, absolute stone age. It would be over. It would be over. No cash for you in the banks. Your money would be gone. No operating ATM machines. Nothing. It will be over. So the Fed must continue what it's doing right now. And again, this is not by accident. They are deliberately pushing us into a currency crisis, for which we are in one right now, and it's going to get worse so they can have an excuse to issue the digital dollar. People, that's the real grand plan here, and I think you all know that.
Regulators are arguing back and forth. However, the driver for change will happen under an emergency scenario. SWIFT being hacked, a financial shock, a cyber emergency. Some type of emergency will come that locks up the financial systems. Regulations will be passed suddenly in order to save the system.
Fiat money is 50 years old. It's 50 years ago that Nixon broke the link from gold to the dollar. And that is a short time in the great scheme of financial history, which goes back, well, 4,000 years, if you want to really go right back to the beginnings of money in Mesopotamia. We don't, I think, realize how recent our existing system is, nor do we realize how out of date it is. A 1970s system, SWIFT being another 1970s innovation, credit cards, pretty much a 1970s innovation. All of this stuff worked pretty well for most of the last half century, most of my life. Doesn't work very well anymore. It's actually a really quite crappy system that takes a long time to make payments happen. It is a system that has created rent-seeking entities called banks that use regulation to build walls to exclude competition. And I think when Darrell Duffy testified just the other day, my colleague here at Stanford, in Congress, on this question, the point he made was that we need the innovations, whether it's crypto or central bank digital currency, to force the existing financial system to up its game. Because right now, the incumbents of the fiat money system, which are the big banks, do a terrible job. They're really quite bad at getting the money that we want to send from A to B. And they also collect egregious rents from the transactions they process and the services they provide. And that's another part of the story that I don't think we did discuss back when we first met, that monetary systems not only come into existence at quite high frequency historically, but they also kind of go off. They kind of pass their sell-by date because technology overtakes them. And it's kind of bizarre that we still use SWIFT for interbank transactions. I mean, it's great from the point of view of the US government because it gives it the superpower of financial sanctions. But there's no obvious reason why 50 years from now, we'll still be doing international transactions via SWIFT. In fact, I'll bet you 100 Bitcoin we won't be.
The average lifespan of fiat is 27 years, and the dollar is 50 years old. Throughout history, money has evolved. We're at an inflection point. It would be arrogant to believe that this time is different. The foundation of the banking system is cracking. Either fintechs can patch those cracks early, or there could be a full-blown collapse and rebuilt on blockchain technology.
This is a disaster that looks quite like a world war. If all you knew about the United States today was the federal debt in relation to GDP and the size of the Fed balance sheet, you would say, wow, there must have been World War III. Maybe it began in 2008 and it lasted until 2021. So we're really in the midst of a tremendously dramatic shift in public finances and in monetary policy. And that may be the historically significant thing about this disaster.
The economic data is monumental. Similar times in history, we have had world-changing events happening in parallel with the same data. Again, this time is no different. Reality will catch up.
And I think the U.S. regulation, frankly, has been pretty reactionary. There's been, especially on the part of the SEC and the Trump administration, a real effort to try to kill this off, keep it in a box, to warn people away from it, without much real intelligent thought about what role it can play in the financial system in the future. I think there's now different people in charge who are better informed, and maybe we will see more intelligent regulation coming out of Washington, but it's not clear to me that the SEC, for instance, has any role to play in this area unless you can identify certain assets that really are securities. And at this point, no court has really held that that's the case. There are still some big test cases making their way through.
XRP will play a role in the future financial system. This case is an attempt to keep the tech in a box. The big banks have a lot to lose when the smaller banks and fintechs can settle cross-border payments without them. There has never been a court case to determine the SEC having jurisdiction of crypto. The SEC has jurisdiction in schemes, not digital assets.
So that leads to the question, XRP has been on the market for 8 years. When does a digital asset become a security or maybe something else? And how does the SEC determine that?
Well, I think that is a difficult question, and it's something that I've also, again, tried to get us to be a little bit more precise. When we think about a crypto asset, a digital asset as being a security, what we're doing is we're saying that we think it's being sold as part of an investment contract, which means that there are promises being made around the sale of that asset. Doesn't mean that the asset itself necessarily has to be a security. It means that it was being sold as a security. Then the question becomes, at what point can someone sell that asset not as a security? And that is a very difficult line.
Again, Hester is asked about Ripple and talks about how digital assets are not securities, but it's about how digital assets are sold. I believe this case is about the escrow and the future sales of XRP.
And I made the point that financial history is an evolutionary story, and there are periods, Cambrian Explosion-like periods, when lots of new things suddenly come into existence, just as there are periods like the financial crisis when a lot of institutions go extinct.
At the bottom, but there's that missing layer of what is the IP, what is the shipping container that's going to wire them all together. And that's the part, thankfully, that's being introduced. Now, when you combine then those new apps, those new devices, those new databases with an interoperability layer, boom. I mean, that changes the world overnight. And I think we're so close to that. And that will create this Cambrian explosion of, some of the companies here that will suddenly have this global platform to be working on, which will make fintech so much easier. Everybody in fintech knows how difficult it is just within a country, let alone to try to go global. That is all about to change, and that's great for everybody.
We are at a time of a Cambrian explosion of innovation. At the same time, we are watching the big banks become extinct. A pivotal time in history. A global next-gen platform that offers tremendous benefits and can improve life around the globe is on its way. The fear of regulatory uncertainty is just noise. Focus on the big picture, because if history rhymes, we are about to see a fundamental shift. The West may collapse very suddenly. Complex civilizations do that because they operate, most of the time, on the edge of chaos. Niall Ferguson. Thank you for watching my video. If you could please take a moment to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, it would be greatly appreciated. Let me know what you think in the comments below.